Hello, and welcome back to the Gritty Tales writing blog. I am Tyler M Mathis, host and sole proprietor. I've been gone for a while due to various projects. On the personal side, I've written a couple of short stories and started a novel. And on the ghostwriting end of the business, where I actually make money, I finished a novel recently and spent about the last 5 weeks rewriting it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the rewrite process. Writing fiction is fun, or at least it's supposed to be. It's that rush of creativity that makes it so, when your brain is firing on all 8 and you just get rolling. You're making all the right moves, choosing the proper words, and you just feel unstoppable. And unlike most aspects of the writing craft, the new writer gets this more than the weary veteran who's done it a million times. So, you complete that manuscript, be it short story or novel. Bully for you! No, seriously, great job. You've accomplished something that lazy people can only dream about, and that deserves a bit of self-congratulations and personal backslapping. But what happens now with your story? Does it go straight out to publishers and agents? Do you self-publish it immediately, if self-publishing was your intent all along? Well, you could try those avenues right away, and many newer authors do. And the vast majority of these stories are rejected, or they're poorly reviewed if they are self-published. And that is because they were not rewritten. This is a hard pill to swallow, but open wide. Practically nobody gets it right the first time. Their story, that is. Unless you are a genius, the literary equivalent of Mozart, you're going to have to rewrite. There's no way around it unless you're writing for your own gratification, with no ambition whatsoever to publish in any form. But I can hear some of you disputing this essential truth even as I speak it. My first draft is just how I want it. Why should I rewrite it? I see new writers make that claim all the time. They think it makes them organic and genuine, but in truth, they don't know any better. So your first draft is how you want it. Okay, but doesn't it matter as well what agents, editors, and above all, your readers think of your story? You'd best think over what I just said, because once you send that story out in the world, it is going to be judged by the people I just mentioned. And your personal standards? They mean nothing to industry professionals. They want to work with writers who produce professional level work, period. And if you think you can skirt intense scrutiny by self-publishing, think again. Readers can be downright ruthless, and you don't want 1- and 2-star reviews because you published a poorly written story. And they will call you out on it. And when Joe or Jane reader comes across your book while browsing online, they'll see your lower than average reviews and move on. I mean, why wouldn't they? Nobody wants to read a poorly written story. Thus, it is essential that you rewrite your story at least once. But if you've never rewritten a story before, you might be wondering how to do it and what you should be looking to change. After all, you see no problems with it. It's just how you want it. That's where I come in. We're going to discuss in depth what your goals should be for the rewrite, so let's get to it. Remember all that fun you had writing your first draft? That feeling of unlimited creativity, that writer's swagger of assurance? Well, forget about all of that. The rewrite is about humility and attention to detail, recognizing the flaws in your work and fixing them. If you're having fun rewriting, it's for one of 2 reasons. First, you might have written a good scene or chapter that requires little effort to rewrite. You had a great day writing it in first draft, and that section just doesn't need many changes. That's great, but it's also an exceptional occurrence. The second reason, and far more common, that you might be having fun is you're not doing your job properly. In other words, you're not being observant and patient enough. Rewrite is a bitch, and you need to pay meticulous attention to everything. Your main goal in rewrite is to streamline your manuscript, which means cutting the word count while ensuring that your prose flows smoothly, even better than it did before. We cut word count by improving sentence structure, eliminating extraneous information, and getting rid of getting rid of redundancies. Well, sometimes we get rid of sentences as well, but beside the point. An example of improving sentence structure is getting rid of passive voice construction whenever possible. Now, I'm not going to explain here what the passive voice is. If you don't know, stop watching this right now and go research it. A writer need not be an expert grammarian, but knowing the difference between active and passive voice is essential. Anyway, about 90% of the time, that weak passive sentence can be rewritten as active, and usually in fewer words. Consider this passive voice sentence. He was taken to jail by the guards. That's 8 words long. And here's the active voice. The guards took him to jail. 6 words, better construction, and more powerful because the active is just that, people doing something. The guards are taking the guy to jail. Juxtapose that with the passive, where the guy is not in charge. He's having something done to him. Active voice is better writing. It's that simple. So squash as much of that passive voice as you can get away with. Sometimes a passive sentence works depending on the situation, but that is the exception. Now let's talk extraneous information. When you rewrite, look at every detail you present to the reader. Writers often get wrapped up in describing objects, buildings, and characters. You need to judge how much of that your readers will want to slog through. Maybe you're writing a fantasy and you happen to be an expert on castles in medieval warfare. So you describe a castle in detail as your main character is riding there to meet with the lord in residence. And being an enthusiast on the topic, you go into minute detail. Don't do that. Give your readers the key details only and let their imaginations fill in the rest. Don't bludgeon them with your knowledge. They didn't buy your fantasy to read your 3-page description of a castle. They bought a story, and they expect you to tell them one. If you want to describe castles in great detail, then take up nonfiction writing. There's plenty of room for you to do that. Needless to say, well, hopefully needless to say, this same rule applies to all descriptions, particularly characters, where a lot of writers tend to go overboard. And even worse, most decide to dump the entire description in one lump sum. Again, just the facts. Or you can even ditch character description altogether if you're writing short fiction, as is often done. You can get away with that, with describing your characters, just by setting a proper scene, believe it or not. Say in a short story, a couple of drug dealers are sitting in a meth den talking business to kick things off. Why describe them unless one has a quirk that becomes important later on? Or unless the character is out of his element in that situation. In other words, he's not a drug dealer. But for our purposes, they're 2 typical meth dealers. We can just leave it at that. Each reader is going to have some idea of how a meth dealer looks. So why belabor on description if you don't have to? I'm sorry, I'm a little stuttery today. I don't know what the hell's going on. But anyway, in novels, character description is more important, for readers want a better idea of whom they're reading about. But you must decide what is essential to include and what extraneous info to cut on those descriptions. Just remember, story always comes first. Now let's move on to redundancies, which is a simple fix. Don't write the same thing over and over. It happens frequently, though. Redundancies are not usually repeated verbatim, however, so you must be watchful. I'll give an example from a short I recently wrote, where the main character, a con man, travels to another part of the country and is completely out of his element. Bad things happen to him, and he vows never to visit this area again. Once we know that, there's no reason to say it again. Yet when rewriting the story, I mentioned it 2 more times in his thoughts. But we need not relate the character's every thought. Only one's important to the story, and once said is enough. So I deleted the other 2 mentions. Simple, right? Another essential to scrutinize in rewrite, and this one's huge, is your plot and pacing. Does your plot even make sense now that you're looking back on it? How about the motives and actions of your characters? Are all of your scenes essential, or is there room to cut one or more? You have to delve into those details, get rid of the non-essentials, make sure everyone is acting how they should, and ensure that all scenes and chapters are necessary and properly located to efficiently advance the story. Now, I've never had much issue with this, but a lot of writers do. If you're unsure of your plot or pacing when you start to review, I suggest hiring a developmental editor or finding a reliable beta reader to go over your story with an impartial eye, because any work based on a thin or implausible plot premise is going to stink. And a story improperly paced will either drag or it'll be missing essential elements. Dragging stories lose readers, and omitting crucial information confuses them. You have to get all of your plot details and pacing straight, or you're just wasting your time. Rewrite doesn't sound so fun now, does it? Well, buck up, because we're just getting started discussing all the stuff you need to go over. So what else are we looking to fix during rewrite? Well, typos and basic grammatical errors come to mind. Most of you will opt to send your stories for editing, and if you're new to writing, you definitely should. However, that does not excuse you from proofing your story. In addition to misspelled words, homophones are also typos, and sometimes Microsoft Word doesn't pick them up. That's your job, and you should be thorough enough to catch them. Another issue is our wording. We want to use powerful verbs and adjectives, but we don't want our readers having to open a dictionary app every 2 minutes to understand what the hell we're saying. Just because the thesaurus, well, that's another tongue twister, says it's a synonym doesn't always make the word an acceptable replacement. So always check the dictionary definition unless you're absolutely sure. We also want to be on the lookout for adverbs, which are often unnecessary. And not just the ly adverbs most writers tell you to cut from dialogue tags, but all of them. Basically, you need to evaluate every word in your sentences. Every one of them needs to have a purpose and pull its weight. If it doesn't, then get rid of it. You'll probably have to rewrite the entire sentence. So be it. That's why you're rewriting. But changing that sentence ruins my flow. Well, adjust, damn it, and rewrite the sentences around it if you have to. Yes, the flow of prose is crucial as well, but we're not going to spend any time talking about it because it is impossible for me to teach you how to make your prose flow. You learn that by reading authors who have mastered it. Enough said. Consistency of style is another rewrite issue. Often we have options of working in different ways that are all acceptable. For example, most style manuals will tell you when writing a possessive of a name that ends in S that you must put an apostrophe behind that final S and then add yet another S. Say your possessor is named Bess. If you obey that rule, her name in possessive is spelled Besses. Now, I don't use that rule. When Bess possesses something, I spell it Bess. Why do we need that extra S taking up space? Not on my page. That's my take anyway, and it is acceptable to do this, so long as I do it consistently. If I change Bess's possessive to the first version halfway through the story, I must choose during rewrite which version I want and make them all consistent. The same thing applies to things like the serial comma, which is the final comma before the word and when you're listing items or people in a sentence, such as, he bought eggs, milk, and juice. It could be written without the serial comma as well. He bought eggs, milk, and juice. You can use it or not. Either way is acceptable these days, but you have to be consistent about it. Inconsistency with these examples might not be a deal breaker with an editor if your story is good, but inconsistency will certainly not improve your professional image when submitting stories. Just something to keep in mind, and it's easy to be consistent, or at least it should be. As a final note on consistency, I'll mention keeping your details straight. This should be a no-brainer, but sometimes we forget, especially with minor characters and objects. If you introduce a character with a certain hair or eye color, that can't change halfway through your story. But it sometimes happens with minor characters who we don't see very often. It's easy for a writer to lose track of these lesser individuals, particularly if the story has a massive cast. A final issue to cover is adding missing information. This isn't a huge problem for most writers because we tend to overdo it on the first draft, not the other way around. But sometimes a crucial detail is missing, so add it. There are a ton of other rewrite issues, but these are the basics, and I can only tell you so much. There aren't enough hours in the day to discuss them all. The rest you must learn on your own through experience. So by now you might be daunted by the prospect of rewriting. You should be. That's how important it is. But it's got to get done, so I'm going to give you my tips from experience on how to tackle rewrite successfully. First off, put your story aside for a while after you finish it. Don't look at it for at least a couple of weeks, preferably for a couple of months. You want some of your details to become foggy in your mind. This way, when you get to step one below, it'll feel like a fresher story that you can tackle with a rejuvenated set of eyes. Step one we'll call the macro stage. Read your manuscript start to finish on your computer, as if you're just reading, any old book by somebody else. Keep the issues I covered above in the back of your mind and try to take an impersonal interest. Like I said, someone else's book. You're not even reading your stuff. Just by doing this, you'll start to notice problems. Fix simple issues like typos right away. The more complex problems, like busted flow and sentences that need rewritten, you flag. You can highlight them, mark them with a symbol you can easily search, however you want to do it. And then you immediately move on. You're not rewriting in depth yet. You're just reading and making the simplest quick fixes. This stage is where we really want to pay attention to plot and pacing, for the legitimacy of these will be proven or disproven in the reading. It's also easier to pick up inconsistencies in this stage, and missing details will also become apparent, so keep your eyes open. Step 2 is the micro stage, where we dive in and start tinkering around for real. Again, do a normal read beforehand on whatever scene or chapter you're about to rewrite. I know, you already did that, but humor me and do it again. Trust me, you'll likely find even more issues to flag. You can't be thorough enough in rewrite. Make a note of the word count for the section you're about to rewrite, then begin. Comb over every sentence and paragraph as many times as you must, checking for every issue. If you've got a great narrator in your mind, put his ass to work. Or you can even read aloud if you like. In fact, I suggest it, and it's a must when rewriting dialogue. Remember, a purpose for every word. If it doesn't work, out of here. If a sentence doesn't flow, make it flow. If you've said it already, don't say it again. If you can make your point with fewer words, make the changes. You're working on a computer, so don't be afraid to write new sentences and juxtapose them next to the old to see which version works better. When you finish the section you're rewriting, check the word count and see how much you shaved off. In my case, it's usually around 10%, but that's going to vary each time. I'm telling you right now, you're going to be stumped on certain passages if you're really intent on making your manuscript as flawless as it can be. It's frustrating, but it's part of the process. Remember way back in vlog number 2 when we discussed the traits a successful writer needs? Well, your writer's fortitude is even more essential during the rewrite, especially when you get stuck on those tough passages. Don't gaff off the necessary changes or pretend all is well when it's not. Dig deep into your well of fortitude, grind out those changes, and polish up your prose. Rewrite is a bitch. It'll bring you to your knees if you're doing it right. That is, acknowledging the flaws in your first draft and doing all in your power to fix them. It is the stage of the writing process that separates the pros from the posers. Take it lightly and do a half-assed job, and you're going to fail. But if you're honest with yourself and put all you've got into the rewrite, you're going to reap big-time rewards. And I'm not talking publishing contracts or bestsellers, though your chances of achieving those goals will certainly improve. I'm merely speaking of quality, the well-crafted work of art you can produce if you put in the time on a thorough rewrite. And when you finish, I suggest comparing the first and rewritten drafts side by side. You will see that the story you thought perfect was in fact far from it. It needed a facelift, a tear down and rebuild, and that's what you've done. And if you had that writer's swagger after your first draft, you'll be strutting around like a barnyard cock once you see all the improvements you've made. That will be your immediate reward. And you might just make some money as well off that story you slaved to rewrite. Earlier I said that every story needs to be rewritten at least once. But is one rewrite enough? Well, that depends on who you are, but the general answer is no. So how many drafts must a story go through before it's ready for submission or self-publishing? Again, it depends on who you are. I've seen writers online crowing about how they've rewritten their book 15 times, for example. That is ridiculous, and if the writer thinks he needs that many drafts, it means he didn't rewrite the second draft properly, nor his other 13 rewrites. Others rewrite once and self-publish because they want to get books out there and sell. As for me, after the rewrite, I let the story sit a few weeks and then do a third draft. The scrutiny on third draft is not so intense. I reread the story again, as though I'm reading another author trying to be as impartial as possible. I flag whatever issues I find, and there are always a few that linger. Then I rewrite, still paying attention to passages I thought were okay, and they usually are. But I always identify a few bugbears, still lurking about, and stomp them appropriately. After completing the third draft, the stories are off to the editor, or they're submitted to editors if they're on the short side, say under 3,000 words. So 3 drafts altogether works for me. I would not suggest doing more than 5 drafts. If you can't get it right by then, I don't know what to tell you other than maybe you're in the wrong business. And remember this, once a story is published in final form, chances are you will still find something else you wish you could change, when you go back and read it again. Usually it's only 1 or 2 words, but there will always be something whether you've done 3 drafts or 15. And that is because writing is an art, and art is never perfect, nor would we want it to be. When I read other authors, I always find passages that I think could have been written better. But at some point, a writer has to decide whether he's done enough to both satisfy his readers and himself. You'll never be perfect, trust me. And if you want further proof of that, check out some famous author interviews about their greatest works. More than a few heavy hitters have said they found glitches in their books they wish they could go back and fix. But it doesn't work that way. And that's a good thing, believe it or not. We need to write other stories, don't we? So strive to produce the best work you can, rewrite the hell out of it, then continue to polish in a reasonable amount of drafts until you are satisfied. Otherwise, you'll spend your career rewriting a handful of stories instead of producing many more. And that'll do it for my lecture on rewriting stories. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and please check out the links to purchase my books, as well as those to my Amazon author page and the Gritty Tales writing group on Facebook, all of which are listed below in the description. Thank you for watching. That is all.